I'm considering divorcing my wife because she can't get over her mom dying. 5 years ago, my wife, who is now 33, lost her mother to lung cancer. It was a harrowing time for all of us, as her mother's battle with the disease was neither quick nor peaceful. During that period, our lives were essentially put on hold. Both my wife and I took extended leaves from work to provide care for her mother. Initially, my wife's response to her mother's illness and passing seemed to follow the expected patterns of grief, experiencing a range of emotions similar to our 3 children. However, after her mother's death, my wife's condition worsened significantly, which, while heartbreaking, was understandable given the circumstances. I can't claim to fully grasp the depth of her sorrow since I've never lost a parent myself, but I do recognize the immense pain she was in. In the months that followed, she struggled greatly with day-to-day life, prompting me to take on nearly all household and childcare responsibilities. She had been participating in grief counseling since her mother was diagnosed and continued for some time after her passing. My efforts to support her were unwavering. She spent many nights crying on my shoulder, and I accepted this as part of our vow to stick together through better or worse. The issue lies in the fact that, even after 5 years, there hasn't been any noticeable improvement in her ability to cope. She discontinued her grief counseling sessions about 4 years ago, and has since been resistant to the idea of returning, convinced that nothing could alleviate her suffering. Her grief intensifies around any major holiday, starting about a month prior and lasting until a week after. During these times, she is profoundly affected, spending hours in bed, crying throughout the day, withdrawing from family interactions, and unable to manage any household tasks. This pattern repeats itself every year, especially from October through January, which includes her mother's birth month. For roughly half of each year over the past 5 years, she has been utterly overwhelmed by her grief, leaving me to single-handedly care for our children. When I say she is overwhelmed, I mean it in every sense. Her grief renders her unable to share in any form of intimacy with me or our children. No cuddling, no family activities, nothing. Our physical relationship comes to a halt during these periods. Attempts to encourage her to express her feelings are futile. She is often too overcome with emotion to speak. This ongoing cycle of intense grief has placed a significant strain on our family life and our relationship. The most heart-wrenching aspect of this situation is how our children have adapted to their mother's state. They've grown accustomed to seeing her in bed, overwhelmed by sadness, and it doesn't even faze them anymore. If I or their siblings inquire about her whereabouts, they might nonchalantly respond with, "Oh, Mom is sad today." The kids have gradually stopped seeking comfort or affection from her, knowing that their attempts are likely to be met with tears rather than warmth. This change in their behavior is something I've discussed with therapists, my own parents, and friends. I'm aware of the common responses to this issue, so let me address them up front. My wife refuses to consider returning to therapy for grief counseling or to seek help for what is clearly severe depression. Despite understanding the necessity, I can't compel her to see a doctor. Believe me, I've tried everything within my power. Yes, the intensity of her grief has not diminished over the past 5 years. It remains as overwhelming as it was initially. I have never, under any circumstances, told her to just get over it or dismissed her feelings. On particularly tough days, I might give her some space, but generally I do my best to offer whatever comfort I can. For those who might judge me for occasionally stepping back, please understand that I'm experiencing what feels like caregiver fatigue. While she doesn't have a history of depression, she has been diagnosed with ADHD. I'm not sure if that's a contributing factor. It feels as though I lost my wife the day her mother passed away. I would give anything to have even a small part of her back, but she seems unable or unwilling to move beyond her mother's death. The thought of divorce weighs heavily on me, and it's a consideration I find distressing, but I'm at a loss for how else to proceed. First update. I quickly wrote that initial post during a break at work, just letting my thoughts flow without much planning. I didn't check it again until later, assuming it would go unnoticed like my previous posts. I was also bracing myself for negative reactions, thinking people might find me insensitive. To my surprise, the post received a lot of attention and kind messages, which was overwhelming. I didn't know how to respond to everyone, so I decided to share an update here. Some suggested that my wife should be admitted to a hospital against her will. I didn't mention this before, but I had talked to our family doctor about it a year ago. He said it's not likely unless she's a danger to herself or others, and my own research confirmed this for our state. I do believe she needs medical help. I think she wasn't completely open with her grief counselor after losing her mom. I remember feeling very sad when she came home from one of her last sessions, saying the counselor thought she wouldn't need much more counseling, and then she just went to lie down and cry. I haven't been able to persuade her to return to counseling. Posting on Reddit opened my eyes to the possibility that she might need more than counseling. A comment also made me realize how risky it could be to threaten divorce. With all this in mind, I've decided against using divorce as leverage. Instead, I plan to write her a letter. In it, I'll express how much we miss her and need her, how much we love and care for her, but also how she needs more help than we can give. I'll encourage her to see a doctor and be honest about everything she's going through. Second update. I hadn't planned on posting again, but after receiving so many messages of support asking for an update, I felt it was necessary. So here's what happened next with my wife, who is on the verge of becoming my ex. Following my previous post, I took a couple of days to carefully write her a letter. In it, I poured out how much the kids and I love and worry about her. I highlighted the behaviors that were concerning us and expressed my belief that she needed further medical attention. Many of you pointed out that she might be suffering from complex grief, something I mentioned in the letter, noting that the grief counseling she had received years ago seemed insufficient. I avoided mentioning divorce, but made it clear that the kids couldn't keep living under these circumstances. I read the letter to her one evening after the kids were asleep. Her reaction was chilling. She gave me this distant stare for what felt like an eternity before standing up and heading towards the door. When I tried to stop her, asking where she was going and if we could talk about it because I was worried about her safety, she just rolled her eyes at me. In the coldest tone I've ever heard from her, she said, "I hope when your parents die, someone doesn't tell you to get over it." Then she left. I was furious for a brief moment before panic took over, fearing she might harm herself. She had turned off her location on her phone, and despite my numerous calls and texts begging her just to let me know she was safe, there was no response. Just as I was about to call the police, I received a call from her phone. A man answered, briefly telling me she was fine but didn't want to talk to me before hanging up. I felt completely detached from reality at that moment, unsure of what to do next. I continued trying to reach her throughout the night, but eventually, her phone just went straight to voicemail. The next morning, she still hadn't returned home. After dropping the kids off at school and daycare, a routine that thankfully didn't raise any questions about their mom's whereabouts, I tried calling her again with no luck. Her office said she'd called in sick. I also called in sick to work and spent the day on the couch in a state of anxiety, trying unsuccessfully to contact her. Eventually, I called my mom and asked if she could pick up the kids and keep them overnight, explaining only that something urgent had come up and I needed help. It was an incredibly stressful and confusing time, and I'm still trying to process everything that happened. My wife came back home a little after 4 p.m. that day. When I tried to give her a hug, she pulled away from me. I asked her where she had been, but all I got in return was a blank stare. Wondering who had used her phone to call me, I got the same non-response. Frustration got the better of me, and I blurted out that if she didn't want to talk about what was happening, she might as well leave. Looking back, I wish I hadn't said it like that, but I was incredibly frustrated at the moment. Finally, she began to speak, but her voice was devoid of any emotion, sounding almost robotic, as if she was annoyed by the conversation. She mentioned she had been at her friend John's place, not his real name. I had no clue who John was and pressed her for more details. It took over 2 hours of pulling information from her bit by bit. Her responses were minimal, providing only the bare facts I asked for without any additional context or detail. It turns out John is a colleague of hers, someone I've met briefly at company events but never really interacted with. I hadn't noticed any particular friendship between him and my wife before. According to her, over the past year, she had been sharing her feelings and grief over her mother's passing with John, finding solace in his company because he had experienced a similar loss when one of his parents died from cancer. She felt they shared a bond over this that she didn't have with me. After I read her the letter, she interpreted it as me not caring about her or her mother's death, which led her to seek comfort at John's house. I directly asked if there was an affair going on between them, to which she replied no. When I questioned why she never mentioned having such a close friendship with this guy I barely knew, her response was that it was none of my business. I asked her if anything had happened between them while she was at his place, and she told me they cuddled, and he held her while she cried. When I asked to see her phone to read their messages, she wouldn't let me. I couldn't get much more information about what happened. So when she went to shower, I tried to check her phone but found out she had changed her passcode. Luckily, I could still access her iPad with my fingerprint. While she was in the shower, I took the iPad and left the house to search for any proof. At first, I didn't find any messages from a John, but after some digging, I found out she had saved him under Stacy in her contacts. It was clearly him. Their texts went back over a year, with many messages about her mom and him offering comfort. He kept saying I didn't care about her and that he'd treat her better if they were together. She agreed with him in her replies. There were also many texts where she complained about me and he spoke badly of me. The night she left, she texted him saying she was coming over, to which he immediately said yes. The next morning, she texted him, "If he asks, we just talked." I was so upset that I threw up in a Walmart parking lot for 20 minutes. When I got back home, she was on the couch on her phone, acting like nothing happened. I confronted her and told her I knew everything and that she had to leave. She just looked at me until I got angry and told her to leave. She then said, "John was right about you," and left. I haven't seen her since then. I told our kids she went to visit her parents because I didn't know what else to say, but I need to figure out something soon. I'm overwhelmed by the thought of divorce, custody, and child support. I feel stuck and haven't taken any steps yet. It feels like she's lost touch with reality, but I can't find it in me to care anymore. I put on a brave face for work and for my kids, but I break down every night after they go to bed. My life feels like it's fallen apart. While part of me thinks John took advantage of her situation, I don't have the energy to convince her that he's bad news. She chose this path over our family, and that's something I'm struggling to come to terms with. How do you like this story? Write your opinion in the comments. Let's get 1,000 subscribers on this channel. Love you.